Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. At least that's where we are right now in Washington, D.C. It's the afternoon, and welcome to this session, Cross-Content Approaches to Youth Climate Action. My name is Phoebe Sherman, and I work at the National Postal Museum. I want to welcome you to our session. Please share where you're joining us from in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And so I'd love to bring on my other colleagues who will also be part of the session to introduce themselves.
My name is Alison Cawood. I am the Director of Public Engagement at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center.
Hi, I'm Beth Evans. I manage youth and family programs in the Education Department at the National Portrait Gallery.
I'm Maureen Leary. I am the Youth and Family Programs Manager at the National Postal Museum.
And hello again, my name is Phoebe Sherman, and I am the Student and Teacher Programs Manager at the Smithsonian National Postal Museum. And again, thank you for joining us, and we are so excited to welcome you to our session. So on the next slide, I do want to first get started. Going over our essential question and session objectives. So to help steer us through about the next 50 minutes, I do want to share our goals for this session and that guiding question. So our essential question asks, how can integrating interdisciplinary resources and teaching techniques in the classroom enhance student learning and inspire meaningful youth climate action? And as we explore this question to help guide our thinking, and our goals for that, our session objectives, are to really explore how a cross-content approach to complex topics can promote holistic understanding, can support diverse learners, inspire action as well. We also hope to demonstrate how museums can offer meaningful resources to support cross-content inquiries. Before we go deeper into these ideas, though, we thought it would be useful or helpful to ground us in how this session came to be, which my colleague Maureen will speak about.
Thank you, Phoebe. So the audience may have noticed there are two of us here from the National Postal Museum. And when Phoebe and I were considering ideas for a summit presentation, we thought about how the Postal Museum's collection really lends itself to collaborating with other Smithsonian museums and really all kinds of organizations. And this is particularly true, of course, about postage stamps, which are a big part of our collection, because images on stamps connect to almost any topic you can think of. And if you go to the next slide, please. You can see on this slide, this really gives you a snapshot of that idea of stamps connecting to so many topics. Here we have about half of the stamps that will be issued in 2024. The first US postage stamp was issued in 1847, and since that time, there have been over 5,000 stamp designs issued. So while the Postal Museum is a history museum, our collection provides us with so many opportunities to explore content in interdisciplinary ways. Next slide, please. So one of the topics we really love to explore is the environment and conservation. This topic really in particular does lend itself to interdisciplinary learning. So here you can see a set of postage stamps that were issued in observance of the very first Earth Day, which was April 22nd, 1970. In the 54 years since that occasion, there have been dozens of postage stamps issued on this theme. Next slide, please. So the first postage stamp that were labeled wildlife conservation appeared in 1956, featuring 3 endangered animals, the wild turkey, the pronghorn antelope, and king salmon. These stamps were so popular, they were followed by that 4th stamp, which was the first one that popped up there, in 1957. Featuring one of the country's most endangered species, the whooping crane. From that point on, conservation-themed stamps were issued regularly, featuring specific animals and biomes, and also just promoting general messages about protecting the environment. Earth Day has been featured on stamps a few times, on both the 25th and the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day, but also part of the Celebrating the Century series that came out in 1999. Research and scientific study of the environment has also been championed on postage stamps. the Aurora Australis stamp you see under the year 2007 commemorated the International Polar Year, which was a multinational research program focused on the Arctic and the Antarctic. And we also see here a stamp offering a visual representation of the planet's sea surface temperatures. And that was made using data generated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA. USPS official Glenn Walker said of that Aurora stamp, but really it applies to all the stamps you see. Beyond their obvious beauty, these stamps also carry a message. Just as it is our privilege to enjoy the wonders of nature, it is also our duty to preserve and protect these wonders. So there's a bit more to this story of conservation and stamps. So I'm going to now turn it over to Phoebe to explore how stamps can really concretely impact conservation efforts and how the Postal Museum has developed collaborative programming around this.
Thanks, Maureen. So as Maureen shared that there is a long history of connection between conservation and postage stamps, I want to talk about kind of what that might look like at a more detailed level. So while most stamps serve as evidence that correct postage has been paid to send the mail, some have additional purposes. The stamps that you're seeing on the screen right now, you might be familiar with some of them. These are known as revenue building stamps. These particular ones are semi-postals. And what a semi-postal is that it's a stamp that has a higher than normal postage rate, and then the excess revenue that that stamp generates is then donated to a charity or given to a specific cause. However, not every revenue stamp is used to send mail like these ones are. If we go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these objects are another type of revenue stamp known as a non-postage revenue stamp. And a non-postage revenue stamp is used to raise money like the semi-postals were, but they're not used as regular mail postage. And so in the chat, I'd like to invite you to share some observations about the objects that you see. I'm curious if anyone is familiar with these objects. You can share what you notice about these objects, about the stamp art. Maybe if you have any ideas about the purpose of what these objects have. And while you're typing, I will share a little bit about them. So the object on the left, that blue card, that is the first federal duck stamp from 1934. And then on the right is the 1979 federal duck stamp. And some of you might be familiar with the duck stamps. Please let us know if you are. But if you're new to that world of duck stamps, I'll share a little bit about that program. So in 1934, a law was passed in the United States that required every waterfowl hunter over the age of 16 to purchase and carry a valid annual duck stamp as part of the requirements for a hunting license. Now, that might seem kind of counterintuitive to a session on climate action and conservation, but those duck stamps are revenue stamps. So the money from the purchase of that stamp goes back to wetlands and waterfowl conservation in the United States. The duck stamp program has continuously operated since 1934. It's still a requirement for that license today. It has raised over $1.1 billion and conserved more than 6 million acres of natural wetlands habitat through the National Wildlife Refuge system, excuse me. But I want to go a little bit more into the art of the duck stamp. So if we take a look on the next slide there. So these duck stamps are a few more examples of what the federal duck stamp has been over the past few decades. So from left to right, or these are from 2002, 2005, and 2001. And again, in the chat, I'd like to invite you to share what resonates with you or stands out about these stamps. What's the first thing that you notice about that stamp art? For me, I'm always drawn to the incredible detail that's included in the subjects, especially because the art itself is one of the most important parts of the duck stamp program. The design of the stamp is selected through a public art contest. So each year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service holds an art contest, and any artist 18 years or older may enter. And the winning artist then sees their work as the following year's federal duck stamp. It's the only stamp that is selected through a public art contest like that. And while the actual federal duck stamp requires participants to be 18 years or older to submit their work, there is a youth component to this program that I really do want to focus on. So on the next slide, we can talk a bit more about the Junior Duck Stamp Contest. So youth conservationists play a really important role in the future of the duck stamp program. The federal Junior Duck Stamp program began in the early 90s, and it consists of a similar style art contest where youth submit their own duck stamp designs and a winner is selected in a national art contest. And you can see some of the recent art that has won on the screen there. So with the Junior Duck Stamp program, there is no hunting license component. It is just focused on the art and celebration of wildlife and conservation. Though the Junior Duck Stamp is still a revenue stamp. And so the money that's sold from that Junior Duck Stamp contest goes back to local environmental and educational programming. People who purchase a duck stamp could be hunters, as it's still required for that license, but they might also be philatelists or stamp collectors. They could be appreciators of art, conservationists, outdoorsmen, and so much more. I think what's so fascinating about the duck stamp program and about the longevity of this program and the art of this program is that it really appeals to folks for so many different reasons. The stamps themselves are connected to so many things. You can be connected to the stamp because of the type of waterfowl or environment that it represents. Maybe that's a place you've been or a bird you've seen, or maybe it's an art style that you like, or maybe you just like being outdoors. Whatever there is, there's so many different entry points to learning about conservation through this program. And that can also happen in the classroom, right? With young people. These stamps can be used to support learning about different strategies of conservation through the intersection of civics, conservation, and art. And I want to share one of what that could look like. So on the next slide. So an example of what that could look like, not too long ago, in collaboration with the National Portrait Galleries in Dialogue program, we explored these ideas through the lens of pairing together two different objects, one from the Portrait Gallery and one from the National Postal Museum. And we looked at this Julie Packard portrait by the artist Hope Gangloff and also the federal duck stamp. And really, by observing each object, diving deeper into its stories, we had a conversation about what sustaining climate action looks like and what are the different ways that people can engage with and act in our communities and how that doesn't have to look the same for everyone. And for me, what I take away the most from this program is really looking at the varied amount of entry points that can inspire action. Right? What that action is and how we get there doesn't have to look just one way. It doesn't have to only be science. It doesn't have to only be civics. There can be climate action through financial resources. There's action through education. We can find inspiration for and create action through art as well. And I'd love to bring my colleague, Beth Evans, on camera now from the National Portrait Gallery. And Beth is going to speak further about the power of that art connection and youth climate action on the next slide.
Thank you, Phoebe. I'm here to discuss a few of the programs at the Portrait Gallery that focus on Earth awareness and climate action, and I hope to convey some of the techniques that have helped my colleagues and me connect art and climate action. These techniques can be used and modified in classrooms and other institutions. The first program I want to highlight was the Earth Day Family Festival that was held in partnership with our colleagues at the Smithsonian American Art Museum on April 20th. This festival was free to the public and included live music, art activities, gallery talks, artist-led workshops, and more. This festival was a fun, educational, multi-generational celebration of the Earth. Each portrait gallery art activity featured at this festival highlighted a portrait from the special exhibition, Forces of Nature, Voices That Shaped Environmentalism. For example, in these photos we see here taken from this day, we see a bug craft at the station dedicated to entomologist E.O. Wilson, whose portrait was in the exhibition or is in the exhibition. And there was also a leaf rubbing activity to teach about environmental sociologist Dorcetta Taylor. Next slide, please. At this festival, we were joined by orchid experts from the Smithsonian Gardens and rangers from the National Park Service. With this festival, we wanted to inspire, excite, and give hope for the future, and these partners helped us to do just that. As we look for ways to engage our audiences with climate action, community partners and content experts help with this monumental task. Here on the left, we see photos of the orchid experts leading hands-on demonstrations of orchid anatomy, something which I know nothing about, but they do. And then the park rangers brought games and other activities, but more than that, they brought expertise and credibility to the day's event. This matters to young people, such as the participants we see in the middle photo and the top right, because young people care about getting their information from trusted sources. As the top right photo shows, the rangers also brought a ton of fun. Next slide, please. The focus on art was an important component for our festival. We offered a variety of activities that encouraged visitors to go into the environmentalism exhibition, look at the portraits, and learn the history. In these photos, we see families participating in scavenger hunts to encourage close looking at art. There's another example of the bug making workshop because bugs featured prominently in some of the artwork. And we also think that telling stories of pioneering scientists and activists who have shaped this movement is a great way to engage young people in the work, and portraiture offers a really fun and engaging visual aid in this effort. I should mention, if you're interested in knowing more about these portraits, here's a link that we're going to share in the chat to the Forces of Nature exhibition website, which also includes other supplemental materials. The exhibition, if you're in the DC area, is open until September 2nd. Earlier in this presentation, Phoebe showed a still of our portrait of marine biologist Julie Packard, and her portrait is in the exhibition. And in the chat, we're going to put a link to the beautiful virtual exhibition dedicated specifically to her portrait. The Earth Day Family Festival was a huge hit for us at the Portrait Gallery and my colleagues at the American Art Museum. Thousands of people attended, but the Portrait Gallery offers other smaller opportunities to engage young people in climate action through portraiture and storytelling. Next slide, please. Young Portrait Explorers is a twice-monthly 30-minute interactive Zoom program that tells the stories of influential people in U.S. history. Environmentalists and scientists feature prominently in these activities, which I plan and facilitate with my colleague Irina Rubenstein. Here we see slides from our PowerPoint program about George Washington Carver. The slide on the left is the one in which we introduce the person and focus on close looking at the portrait. We ask, what details do the children see? What colors stand out? With this portrait, we pretend to jump into the slide and stand with George Washington Carver as we explore our five senses. What do we see, hear, taste, smell, and feel as we join him in his garden? We might pose like he is, gently holding the petals of the flower as we conduct our botanical experiments alongside him. We want young people to take an interest in the details of nature, to appreciate it, and hopefully want to take care of it in the same way that he is in this portrait. To that end, because we always include vocabulary in our Young Portrait Explorers programs, in this case, we want to give these budding scientists the terms that they would need to explain what they're doing. So we teach them what botany is, what a botanist does, and what agriculture means. Next slide. Young Portrait Explorers always includes a movement activity and an art activity, both to help with kinesthetic learning and also because it's just more enjoyable for all of us. So with George Washington Carver, we sing and act out words to a song about what we see in a garden, like flowers and trees and birds. Then we walk through the process of creating a flower garden with either paper or crayons, depending on what materials they have available. And for the final 5 to 10 minutes, we listen to soft music and the children work on their own garden creations. The idea of a program like this is to, if you'll forgive the pun, plant the seeds of environmentalism in these children. They can observe what nature looks, feels, and smells like. They can create the beauty that they want to see in nature. They can be scientists working to build a stronger environment. I'm now going to invite my colleague Alison Cawood to join me, since Alison is also involved with Smithsonian programming to excite young people about environmental work.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. So I'm excited to be part of this group and this presentation. I come at this probably from the most traditional way that you would think of this. I am at part of the Smithsonian called the Environmental Research Center. Could you do the next slide, please? And so obviously, the focus on environment and climate change is a little more obvious than what you might think of for educators who work at art museums or history museums. But we've been thinking a lot about the ways to engage students that are interdisciplinary and also to engage students who may not have a very strong science identity. So science may not be the way that they can connect into the environment and into climate action. So finding other pathways to make that happen. So I want to talk specifically about our Baltimore High School internship program. So this is something that we started earlier this year. We started in February. We've had 2 cohorts of 10 high school students. They're all from Baltimore City in Maryland. And it's an exploration of environmental issues in the city of Baltimore that's really place-based. So we're talking about Baltimore specifically and what's happening and some of the ways that that came to be. Next slide, please. So I am a scientist by training. Most of what we do here at the Environmental Research Center is very much in a STEM education kind of a space. And so our internship does include some of that. So here we have photographs of some of the interns who are exploring native bees and who are doing quadrats to look at plant diversity in different microhabitats and who are doing photographs of pollinators. So the students are involved in, kind of hands-on data collection and things that we very traditionally think of as STEM education. Next slide, please. But then we also do a lot of things that kind of start to fall outside of what you might traditionally think of as STEM education. So the students worked with part of a community group that was building raised beds to help increase pollinators and insect biodiversity in their space. This was with a church. So they were learning to use power tools a bit and working with folks who had expertise in that space. We visited an urban farm with where there's a collective of community members who have chickens and rabbits and are growing all kinds of food and herbs that they're using and sharing throughout their community. We talked to members of the Chamber of Commerce in downtown Baltimore, and they showed us some of the environmental restoration that's happening and talked about the ways that that's impacting business and tourism and the ways that the environment plays into how some of those decisions are made and considered within the city. Next slide, please. We also focused a lot on having the interns hear from experts that have a wide range of backgrounds. So we did career panels where we had people come from the Department of Public Works to talk to the students, and people come from a nonprofit in the city that's planting street trees, and people come from an environmental justice journalism program to talk to the students about the ways that they integrate data and science into storytelling and into the ways that they engage community. Next slide, please. At the end of the internship, each of the students has to come up with an action plan. So taking some of the things that they have learned and engaged in as part of their internship experience and thinking about what they want to do with that. And we've gotten like a really wide range of things. We had a student who was very inspired by this idea of Black communities in Baltimore being often less connected to nature than some of the white communities in Baltimore. And she was very much felt that this was an environmental justice issue and wanted to hold workshops for Black youth in Baltimore to help them better connect with the environment and with the outdoors and with nature in the city. We've had a different group of students that at their school, they had just put in an outdoor classroom, but there were no there wasn't any like plantings or anything around it. It had mostly focused on the infrastructure that the students would use as part of that outdoor learning space. And so the students put together a proposal that they actually implemented. It was very cool to put flowers, and especially flowers that were attractive to native pollinators out in this outdoor learning space at their school. So, these are all things that are completely driven by the students, and we're able to give them a small stipend to implement those projects. So to buy supplies, to buy flowers and to do that kind of thing, which has been really, really, really cool to see the kinds of things that they come up with and the kinds of ways that they translate the experiences that we're being able to curate for them into what they care about and what matters to them. Next slide, please. So I focus on the internship program because that is the best aligned with kind of what we're talking about here today, but did want to mention a few of the other things that we do that engage with educators and families and this idea about climate action and that's interdisciplinary. So we have a research experience for teachers. So we bring local middle school teachers and they come to our campus and spend 6 weeks with us and are embedded in labs and learn all about science and then think about ways that they integrate that back into their classrooms. And a lot of that has to do with science, but we also had a teacher, one of the teachers in the waiters in the picture there, who did an interdisciplinary project at her school with the art program, and they looked at orchids as art in a very similar idea to what Beth is describing, right? So they built models of the orchids and talked about the science of them, but also the art of them and their place in culture. We do public events often with community partners. So this photograph is from an event we did with a church community and that's doing restoration on their site, and invited members of the community to come and look at the space and see the restoration and learn about some of the science and do some hands-on things. And then we've collaborated with our local library system to do science kits that could be taken home and could be used. And they've connected that to books that they have in the library and other ways that youth and families can kind of think about the science and how it connects to these other parts of their lives. We've also collaborated with the Postal Museum on their Stamp Stories program, and I'm going to hand it over to Maureen to talk more about that.
Thank you so much, Alison. And I got to say, one of the beautiful things about working on this presentation was learning more about that internship program that you run at the Environmental Research Center. I just think it's amazing. And I think probably all of us doing this presentation would actually love to hear from the audience about ways that you all maybe have incorporated some real life learning with environmental concerns with any learning populations you might work with. I think that's such a valuable thing for students to be able to see the effects and have it be part of what's happening to them in their lives in their neighborhoods. So I just really think that's awesome, Alison, that you all do that. But I do want to talk about the collaboration that I did with the Environmental Research Center. It was part of a video series called Stamp Stories. I had so much fun working with the staff there. For this series, I partnered with 16 other Smithsonian museums and units to make videos on all kinds of topics. Like I mentioned earlier, you can find a stamp to connect to just about anything. And these videos do connect to museum objects and postage stamps, and also to children's books to provide an engaging and accessible entry point for young learners to explore our collections. Next slide, please. So the video that I made with the Environmental Research Center was about Eugenie Clark, who was an American scientist known for both her research on shark behavior and her study of fish. Clark was a pioneer in the field of scuba diving for research purposes, and she was affectionately known as the Shark Lady. For this project with the Environmental Research Center, we connected shark tagging activities that their scientists do to the stamp of Eugenie Clark, as well as a set of stamps featuring sharks, and tied it all together with a picture book biography of Clark. So in this one brief video, we pulled in science and art and design and literature all together to tell Clark's inspirational story. Next slide, please. So a key overall goal of that video series was to help tell just a few of the fascinating and important stories represented by the Smithsonian's vast collection. Stamps are a wonderful gateway to that storytelling, and they are really perfectly positioned to help spread educational messages. Postage stamps are already familiar items to most children, and as we've seen, a stamp can be found to connect to almost any topic. For each design the USPS issues, tens of millions of individual stamps are printed, and then those tiny messengers travel throughout the country and the world, being seen by untold numbers of people as they move through the postal system. So here you can see a few recent examples of environment-themed stamps that focus on ocean life. And maybe you've seen some of these stamps on mail that's come to your home. Next slide, please. So another initiative that the Postal Service undertakes from time to time is to engage young people in stamp design. For the 25th anniversary of Earth Day in 1995, the Postal Service held a contest challenging children 8 to 13 years old to design stamps with a theme of preserving the environment. The 4 winning designs were selected from more than 150,000 entries, and they depict a person planting a tree, a house being connected with the power of the sun, a beach cleanup scene, and the earth being cleaned in a bathtub. These stamps are intended to resonate with young people and underscore for them how important their roles are in the larger environmental efforts. And so now I will ask my colleagues to come back on the screen as we tie this all together. And would you like to go to the next slide, please? And we would like to spend a moment talking about making connections and what could some next steps be when looking at cross-content approaches to youth climate action. So taking the first question, what are the benefits and challenges of cross-content inquiries into complex issues like climate change?
So, I mean, I think for me, it's the stepping out of my box, I guess, right? Like we do STEM education. Like we're an environmental research center. We focus on STEM education. That is what we do. And so it takes a shift in kind of our normal kind of process of things to make that work, to make that like be something that we can do and a different way to think about, a different way to engage like our research scientists and things. So that's one of the things that for me personally has been kind of like one of the challenges that we've dealt with.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, Alison, that sometimes it's, when we talk about cross content, it can be tricky because I think at the Smithsonian where we have units and museums that focus on different areas, we feel like we maybe are content expert in our area, but then, you have to kind of stretch yourself to maybe pull in other areas and really make those solid connections with other disciplines. But I think the real benefit of that is that's how real life works, right? We don't like live in these little boxes of, math and English and, out in the real world. So that's
to that end, I would say certainly it gets me out of my box that I recognize that I am not an expert in this and I need to find other people who are. And so it's super exciting to work with other people, but I recognize that it is added work to, find these partners, establish these relationships. I think within the Smithsonian, we're lucky because we already have, many of us, this pattern of working together and sort of we know each other. But then to go beyond that, it can be both a challenge and then obviously a reward as well. But I just want to acknowledge that it is added work. As soon as you bring in other people, that you are giving yourself a little bit more work, but the benefit greatly outweighs the exhaustion.
That's one of the connections that, as we've worked together to build this session and as I continue to learn from all of you, that I'm always really excited by is like that access and thinking like, wow, like the orchid experts were there and like, how cool is that? And I also then, try to take a step back and remember, well, not everyone has access to those experts all the time. And I think that, Beth, I think you shared this idea of just planting the seeds of conservation. And Alison, like you really spoke about thinking about ways to engage students who might not already have a strong science identity. And I think that there's a way to shift that thinking from maybe is it about bringing in an expert or empowering young people to feel like they can be an expert on this in their own way, right? If their enthusiasm or their connection to this is coming through a really art-focused lens, and how can they own that and be inspired by the resources that an educator can connect them with or that they can find on their own, and shift that thinking of and how valuable that is to approach this topic through a cross-content lens.
Yeah, that makes me think of some photos that a parent sent me after one of our young portrait explorers that we had talked about an environmentalist. And then this parent sent me photos of their child out in the playground and in the yard, like collecting specimens and things like that, that suddenly the child, without further prompting, really did take on that sense of ownership that they were the scientists. They were doing the experiments after that. So thank you for that.
That's one of the things I actually am so impressed with the programming that all three of you do. Like, I'm working with teens, and often, most of the teens that we have are, in their like second and third year of high school. So not even kind of like earlier teens, they're kind of 15, 16. And, they have some like greater understanding of autonomy and like action and those kinds of things, but you all do it with like really young learners, which I think that is so cool. I think that is such an impressive thing that you all are able to do that.
Well, the young learners really bring the enthusiasm.
I'm glad that you bring that up, Alison, because it reminds me to share that if you are watching and listening and engaging in the chat, please do feel empowered to drop any questions that you might have into the chat box. We are going to save a couple minutes at the end to address questions and things like that. And so please feel empowered to do so. I think that one of the other really fascinating connections that I always kind of reflect on as the four of us have been talking and things like that is, our session focuses on youth climate action, but really I think that the things that we've been talking about can touch on folks of all ages. Alison, you spoke specifically about the professional development program, and I know that the In Dialogue program that myself and my colleagues at the Portrait Gallery did was more focused for adults, but I really do think that the ideas are still quite similar. And, when you approach things through this lens, it really just underlines the way that anybody can engage with these ideas. And that if you're, when I was a classroom educator, I taught history. And so I think there was always a sense where I was like, oh, I can't go into the science stuff. That's not my lane. But it is. And by, thinking about ways to leverage resources to make that spark with students or with colleagues to plan or things like that can really just create so much greater resonance of this type of learning.
Yeah, I think that's really the beauty of museum objects, actually, generally, is that, as we like to say, every object has a story, which is totally true. And that story doesn't, stay in one lane. That story has all different kinds of ways that it can branch out into different areas of exploration. And that's, a beautiful way for an educator or parent or whoever to tap into things that children and young learners get excited by. And while developing historical thinking skills and that ability to analyze objects and think critically, all of those things that are so important as they move through their school career.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping if we can pull up our slides again, that would be great. Thank you so much. And so we talk a bit about some of the challenges and some of the connections. And again, I'd like to invite everyone to share some of the wins that you might have had. We love hearing those as well. Beth or Alison or Maureen, are there any like great wins or aha moments that you've witnessed in these programs that you can share?
I actually had a moment just yesterday. I do a virtual storytime program, different from Stamp Stories. It's a live program, very interactive. Beth has joined me for it a couple of times, I think. And we actually were talking about Sally Ride and astronauts. So it was not really about the environment per se, but we did have a moment that connected to that because I had asked the kids to bring something to the program that they felt passionate about, something that was an interest of theirs or a hobby of theirs, an object that could represent that and that they could tell the group about. And there was one girl who brought some live monarch caterpillars. She had 4 of them in this box, and they're, feeding on their leaves. She's waiting for them to each build their chrysalis. And I guess it's something she's really passionate about and does every year, feeds them, raises them and then releases them. And she knew all about how they go to Mexico and the whole migration. And so that, and this is a young child, and it was just, and there were other examples in that program too, of these kids who just have these deep interests. And I think, it's so illuminating to have those conversations with young people and understand that they, we need to give them credit for having these deep interests and the ability to really explore something and take it on a long journey and really do some deep learning. I think that we do have a couple of questions, I think, that have come in through the chat. I don't know if you want to, maybe I'll come back on screen and maybe put up the next slide with our contact information. So we do invite you, of course, to contact us with any further conversation you'd like to have or any questions. And you can see all of our contact information there. But I think at this point, we want to transition to answering a few questions, right? I see one that I think actually might be great for Alison, not to put you on the spot, Alison, but it says, we hear that many elementary teachers aren't always sure how to approach climate change. We also find that many educators don't have a solid understanding of how to define climate change.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pieces that are challenging about this, right? So I think elementary school teachers are in such a hard position because so many of them don't get the space to teach science the way that they would like to. I know that we encounter that with teachers that we work with. So I think that's a really challenging thing. And it's something I would like to do some more deep thinking, honestly, about how we can support some of those teachers. But I think that this idea of the definition, I think, is also really important. Because climate change is big. And here at the Environmental Research Center, not that we don't talk about climate change, but a lot of times we frame things as global change because it all kind of goes together, right? Because climate change impacts where invasive species can live. So climate change impacts invasive species biology and, nutrient runoff that's like, this kind of in the separate box of like pollution, but also impacts plants that are then like kind of get double impact from the nutrient runoff and from the carbon dioxide in the air. And so that I think is at least for me, is an easier way to frame it because the climate change specifically, like at least in the world that I come from, in a more like technical science space, tends to be more narrowly defined. And I think that's part of why it doesn't fit in some of these boxes when educators are teaching, because I don't think that's how most of you teach, right? Like, I don't think that's how you're doing this. So I don't know if that's helpful at all, but for me, thinking of it as global change and the way that a lot of these puzzle pieces fit together and kind of reinforce each other, is a helpful frame.
I think that's interesting, Alison, how you combined, I know a phrase that's commonly used, global warming, with climate change to say global change, because I had a scientist explain one time to me that, and I found this very helpful, that global warming is, of course, a thing, but climate change is actually the better term to use. It encompasses a lot more, and it allows us to understand that sometimes what we see are just severe weather events, extreme weather events that might not have anything to do with things being warmer. We might have a really huge snowstorm, and that could be part of climate change. It does not mean that global warming isn't happening. It just means that all the issues that are impacting the Earth are just creating these really extreme weather episodes. So I found that really helpful to think about that too, in terms of explaining it to younger learners, and just even for myself too, just to kind of understand it a little bit more.
And I agree with all of that. And I also want to add that in the programs that we do, that I facilitate, we don't really mention climate change or global warming specifically. And I know that there are a lot of teachers who, for various reasons, are not able to use those terms either. But just like the title of this whole presentation talks about, we do talk about action, that we can instill a sense of like excitement, if not urgency, but excitement and hope in the young people that we talk to, that even if it's something as simple as like talking about keeping the earth beautiful or paying attention to what we see around us, and that gives children this, or young people, the sense of stewardship over the earth, that I think is, I hope is like a much more neutral idea, that the more we pay attention to Earth, the more we appreciate it, the more we want to take care of it. And we look at stories at the Portrait Gallery of people who have sort of led that charge, and whose actions we want to emulate.
On that, Beth, I really responded, like when Phoebe was speaking earlier about the duck stamps, one of the words that she used was celebration. And it really struck me, because in like science about like climate and global change and all of that, they tend to be like downers, right? And we know that climate anxiety among youth is a concern, right? Like this is a thing. And so I think that's part of where like the action and the hope piece that Beth was just speaking to, and thinking about this from different lenses, right? Because I think the science can sometimes be kind of heavy, but like there are all these different ways to express that, and all these different ways to connect that can feel more celebratory in so many ways, that I think that's a really powerful thing too. Because like we don't get, like on the science side of like climate change, global change, the joy piece is often not the focus. So I think that really struck me when that was the way that Phoebe framed part of that program.
Thanks, Alison. I think listening to you all speak and share, I think that idea of, trying to shift the mindset from this a real, really climate anxiety and gloom one of pairing, of course, that, learning what you can and using science and being real and pairing it with something, with an action or with something for inspiration. And I think that creates stronger sustained learning as well, and sustained engagement of students when you pair learning with an activity, right? With something hands-on, with something real. I think that can be quite powerful as well.
And speaking of the celebratory aspects of this, there's a question posed by a participant asking, do you all partner with the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum in collaborative programming in the past year, particularly thinking about their exhibition that focused on the organizing of Black, Indigenous, people of color women who were at the forefront of environmental justice movements? That is a fantastic question. The work that the Smithsonian Anacostia Community Museum is doing around these issues is really spectacular. The Portrait Gallery has worked with them multiple times recently. We haven't worked with them in this particular realm, but I want to emphasize that we are just like a very small sort of subset of all the work that's happening at the Smithsonian. And our colleagues at the Anacostia Community Museum, I think, are leading the charge in showing the celebratory aspect of this. The the summit that they put on, the exhibitions that they do about environmental justice are excellent at bring together this sense of, yes, urgency, but also hope and appreciating what's been done and what continues to happen today. So I definitely want to call out those colleagues and the work that they're doing and encourage all of the participants to go to their website and go to their museum to learn more from them.
And I think we have just under a minute left. And so I think sharing that resource and ending on that action and that inspiration, at least for me, feels like a really good place to be. And so I'd love if we can just pull up our last slide again with all of our contact information. If you are looking for resources or have any additional questions, we encourage you and we want you to feel empowered to reach out. We hope that we are resources for you as well. And thank you so much for joining our session today.